Hey, Billy Donahue here. Welcome in to another Publicans podcast. As promised, I told you I would do another one soon, and this is my next one. I'm really excited to present this one to you. This is my hometown. I'm going to do a much deeper dive than I would at other towns. Please check out my Hatboro one. I just posted that the other day. But this one's for Glenside, PA, my hometown of Glenside. I went to Bishop McDevitt High School right there. I grew up in Glenside since I was 10 years old. So very excited to do this one. We're going to do the Glenside Historical Bar Tour. So I'm not just going to dive into places that are in Glenside. I'm going to give you the history of each place, how far back I can go. I've done some research on this, so I really hope you enjoy this. Crack a cold one and come along for the ride with me. So let's get started here. First off, let's go way back here. There was a place up on the corner of Jenkintown Road and Easton Road, and it was called the Casa Conti. It was a catering hall. It was there for years. Currently, this is a current picture of it. This is called the New Life Church today. But back in the day, it was a place called the Casa Conti. So let's take a look at some older photos of it. This is looking down. Madonna's Beer Distributors on the right. On the left side of the road, you can see the Casa Conti. Okay. That was a catering hall. It was a place you could go out to eat. It was real fancy. I didn't really go to eat there much with my family when I was younger. It was kind of like on the expensive side. But one thing that a lot of people don't know, and I'll give you another picture of it here about the Casa Conti, is there was a hidden gem of a bar in the basement that was kind of like a local dive bar. They had music on the weekends. And that bar was called the Around the Bend Tavern. And it was actually in the basement of the Casa Conti. So imagine having like this big, cool, like, fancy catering hall, which was frequented by many, many different Rotary clubs and things like that, and dignitaries. And then having a dive bar underneath the place called the Around the Bend Tavern. So that's exactly what they had. And in the basement there, they had like blues musics on the weekends. And things like that. They had some local bands, and it sounded like a really cool place to just kind of hang out and chill. And that's the Casa Conti. Now, before it was the Casa Conti, in the 1920s, before that, in the 1800s, from the 1920s it was a place called the Weldon Hotel. Now, the Weldon Hotel, I couldn't find any real pictures of. A lot of times when you go back far, you have trouble finding, really good pictures of these places. But I can tell you, I did find a picture of the atrium, and it looks quite fancy if you can take a look at it there. Kind of had that tropical jungle theme in the atrium of the Weldon Hotel. It's rumored that the great Charles Dickens, the classic author from England, stayed a night here in the Weldon Hotel right in Glenside before it was the Casa Conti. So that's a pretty cool old historical fact there for Glenside people, just in case you didn't realize that. So anyway, let's keep moving. I got a lot of these places I want to show you. This is a real old drawing photograph of what it looked like on Easton Road before they dug out the tunnel. So the tunnel was dug out at one point. They went down. I'll show you that in the next frame. But at one point, the road just went straight across the railroad tracks. So you had to stop every time the railroad came, you had to stop. Which got inconvenient because they started adding lines onto the Glenside, line in the 1920s. So in 1928, they started digging under. But one of the cool things I did find in an old picture is that there was a Havana Cuban cigar shop right across the street from the railroad track when it was on level ground. So that's pretty cool. I'm sure there was probably a couple pubs or taverns, or at least one or two down this road too. I just can't see that far down to really see if there was. But the Cuban cigar shop really caught my eye, and I thought that was kind of a cool little history of Glenside that I was unaware of. Here's the Great Dig, happened in 1928. The street went down. They dug it all out. They took in cranes. Unfortunately, a lot of these buildings that were once on level ground, I think a lot of them either got torn down or they got repurposed or something along those lines. So then if you see, to this day, if you go under Eastern Road, you go right under the train tracks now, as opposed to having to wait for the train, to go across. So it was actually, they were 100 years ahead of their time. Thinking ahead with the traffic that we have now today would be not plausible to do that. Glenside's a very busy train line. But anyway, so here's a picture of that. All right, so let's keep moving. the Burger King. The Burger King up on top of the hill of Eastern Road. That wasn't always a Burger King. Back in the day, it was a place called the Hilltop Inn. And I don't know much about it. I can't find out much about it. But I know that it was a bar and an inn right up there where the Burger King was. So that's pretty cool. If anybody has any pictures of any of these places I go over, by the way, today, please let me know. Throw them in the comment section down there. I'll be happy to add them and do an updated slide list for this. But the Hilltop Inn was where Burger King was. Cool little tidbit up there. I did not know that. So let's keep moving. Okay, this place, the Japanese restaurant. This is in the Keswick Village now, over by the Keswick Theater. This is the Nagomi Japanese restaurant. Now, there has been several bars in this little shop here. So let me go over a couple of them. First off, right before it was Nagomi, it was a place called Plush. Now, Plush, if most Glensiders know that it was on Bar Rescue, they tried to save the bar. They ended up turning it into an Italian place called Osteria Calabria, and it didn't last a year. It was pretty much closed down. Plush was there for several years. It had cheap drinks. It had good bartenders. It was kind of like, they had their own crowd that went in there. I think they had a good happy hour. But it was kind of like, it had its own vibe to it. It had a kind of a weird vibe to it. So a lot of regular Glensiders didn't go towards it. So I could see why it was on Bar Rescue. And by the way, when it was on Bar Rescue about 10 years ago, myself, my brother, and my sister Carrie were all on that episode of Bar Rescue. We were actually lined up for 2.5 hours to get in this place on Bar Rescue, and I stood right next to John Taffer in there. So that's a cool little side bit of trivia for you there. But it was called Plush. Now, before it was Plush, it was a place called Doyle's Bar. I guess like a pseudo-Irish shot and a beer bar, local bar. Every town has local bars, and Glenside has quite a number of them, to be honest with you. But Doyle's was one of them. I can't find a logo for it, so I just recreated a logo. I'll be doing that a lot throughout this video. I just want to get it out there what the names of these bars were. Now, before that was a bar that was most requested when I started researching this online. Before it was Doyle's, the same place was called the Slick Duck Tavern. Okay? This was the logo. Somebody recreated t-shirts for an event in Glenside a few years back. I would love one of these t-shirts, so I might have to recreate one of these myself and buy it online. Super cool, old school Glenside bar. When I asked people on a Facebook page what was like their favorite old school bar, tons of people said the Duck, the Duck, the Duck. So it was called the Slick Duck. One of the cool things I read about the Slick Duck is it had its own cocktail, or one of the bartenders made its own cocktail called the Dead Duck. I'd love to know what's in it because I'd love to recreate it in my home bar, the Sore Thumb Tavern, but I have no idea what's in it. So if anybody knows what's in it, please leave it in the comments down there. Even if you know what liquor it was it a rum drink, was it a vodka drink? I have no idea. But anyway, the Slick Duck Tavern. And if we go way, way back before the Slick Duck, it was called the Ebb Tide Bar. Again, no logo, no pictures, nothing to be found online about it, but that's what it was called. The Ebb Tide Bar in the 1960s. Okay, so we're going way back here. All right, so that's that little place over there. Let's keep rolling through Glenside. All right, now we're back on Limekiln Pike. This place was called the Glenside Ale House. It's now Everlasting Fence Company. It's no longer a bar, but it was multiple restaurants, like Italian restaurants, a pizza place. Then it was the Glenside Ale House. I'm showing you this because I'm going to show you what was there back in like the 50s and the 40s. It's a pretty cool looking spot. But this was the building it was in. Now, the Glenside Ale House didn't last. Unfortunately, every time I went in there, they had cafeteria lighting, which just kills the mood of a bar. And they only had tacos. They didn't really have any other thing, that you could sell for food. So it just kind of killed the bar, I'll be honest with you. And the beer wasn't that great. I guess it was all right. It was quaffable, as they say. But before it was the Glenside Ale House, a long, long before, it was called the Bunker Hill Tavern. Now, the only way I knew this is because I randomly found this old matchbook for sale on eBay. So the Bunker Hill Tavern was on 15 Limecombe Pike, which is exactly that building I showed you. And if I go back to the previous screen, I can show you that Sunday dinners, cocktails, live music, and dancing Fridays and Saturdays. So people from Glenside were whooping it up in this place back in the 40s and 50s. So that was the place to be. You can tell this is old. There's no area code on that. So can't really find much of anything else about it. This is the only thing I found online was this matchbook. If I didn't find it, I wouldn't have known that it existed. But pretty cool, old school, Glenside historical place to be. So the Bunker Hill Tavern. How about that? All right, let's move on. Next up is Jersey's. Jersey's is a great sports bar in Glenside. It's kid friendly. They have great pub grub. They have really good pizza. They have good beer specials. They have trivia and things like that. They have live music. I've played there. My band's played there. It's a great place. But before it was Jersey's, it was a place called Mickey's Steer and Beer. Now, Mickey's Steer and Beer was like a shot in a beer bar. I remember passing this when I was a kid, and all the windows were like grayed out. You couldn't see in the bar at all. They had windows like floor to ceiling, but they were all like, tinted out. You couldn't see in there. And apparently the locals, from what I heard, call it Mickey's Stabbin' Beer because it was a very rough and ready bar. So there you have it. Mickey's Steer and Beer. It was Mickey's Steer and Beer, I think, all through the 70s and 80s. But before it was Mickey's Steer and Beer, I did find somebody that told me that it was a place called the Oasis. So it was the Oasis bar or tavern or whatever it was. It was called the Oasis, and that was in the 50s and the 60s. So this place has been a bar for quite a long time. So old school Glenside, when you pass that place, now you can say, hey, I know the last two bars that were in there. Pretty cool. Let's keep rolling. All right, the Union Jack, they have the best wings in Glenside. I'm not crazy about their name, but but anyway, they do have great beer selection and they do have great wings. But before it was the Union Jack, it was a place called the North Hills Tavern. Now, the Union Jack is up towards North Hills, which is like getting out of Glenside, but it's right on the border. A lot of people still consider the Union Jack to be in Glenside. Also, next to that, North Hills Tavern, the Union Jack was the place, Lou's Seafood and the Dockside Inn, and now it's called the 152 Tap Room or something like that. So go check it out. They just opened, literally just opened September of 23. They have beer specials. They have food specials, so it looks like a really cool spot. It's called the 152 Public House, actually. So go check that out. All right, rolling right along. The Cork Tavern, the legendary Cork. There it is on the left. The Cork is just mine, like McDevitt. I went to McDevitt, and it's tons of McDevitt grads in there. It's your local place. My band's played in here. I'm probably the only band that ever played at the Cork. They have two beers on tap, Miller Lite and like Yingling, and that's it. And it's just cheap. Everybody knows everybody in there. It's a place you go. Even if you're out somewhere else in Glenside, you end up at the Cork. So that's the place to be. Little interesting tidbit, the place right next to the Cork here with the white building, that was a movie theater back in the 1950s called the Glenside Theater. Just like the Keswick Theater, this showed movies. It was a cinema back in the 1950s, so that building right there. By the way, I have something really interesting to show you at the very end of this, so if you stick with me to the end, I'll show you a pretty cool thing about Glenside that most Glensiders don't know. So the Cork, why am I showing you this? The Cork was once called Patsy's Tavern. Now, I don't know if it was pseudo-Irish, I have no idea, but it was called Patsy's Tavern, and I believe it was named after the owner's daughter, whose name was Patsy. So a lot of people online do remember bartending there or frequenting the place, some old-timers, so that's what it was called. The KT. All right, everybody knows the recent struggle with the KT, but they're back in business here. Nice to see them back up and running. Obviously, they get great crowds for the theater across the street. The KT in its current place has been there 25 years, maybe more. Before that, it was a place called Fruit and Stuff. It was a produce stand. But before it was a produce stand, believe it or not, it was a place called Pin Winnie's Go-Go Bar. It was actually a go-go bar in the 70s. So that was right on the corner there. It was short-lived, I believe. I can't really find much about it, but it was called Pinwinnie's Go-Go Bar. Now, before it was the Go-Go Bar, believe it or not, it was the Keswick Tavern. So it was the Keswick Tavern, then it was a Go-Go Bar, then it was a produce stand, then it was the current Keswick Tavern. So that's the sequence of how the Keswick came to be. All right, let's keep moving. Franklin's Pub, unfortunately, closed down recently. That's right on Easton Road. But I do think that every Glensider knows it as the legendary Blue Comet. Now, the Blue Comet, old school Glenside bar, had rockabilly on Sundays, had great happy hour specials. I believe every day from like 5 to 7, they had like $1 Pilsners. And they had free wings and free food. And everybody in Glenside would go here. I mean, everybody. Used to see celebrities in here, too. Brian Setzer from the Brian Setzer Orchestra. He used to hang out in here all the time. The Blue Comet. What a great spot. Sorely missed in Glenside. I hope somebody brings it back. It's a shame what happened to Franklin's, but I hope somebody brings it back. All right, so what was it before the Blue Comet? When I moved in when I was young, before I was able to go out, it was a place called Mac's Place. That's what it was named. Pseudo-Irish, shot in a beer bar probably, but it was called Mac's Place. That was the name of it. But there was a couple incarnations before it was Mac's Place, and I'm going to go over them right now, which maybe some of the Glensiders don't know unless you're like a real old-timer. Before that, it was called the Rambling Rose, which I think is a really cool name for a bar, the Rambling Rose. Again, I recreated all these like symbols real quick. I have no idea what the logo looked like. I have no idea what the storefront looked like. I don't know what the inside of these places look like. And if anybody has any information on any of this, please leave it in the description. I'll give you my email. You can send it to me, but it's a pretty cool spot. Pretty cool name for a bar, and it looked like a pretty cool spot. So, again, this was probably in the 60s. Okay. Now, before it was the Rambling Rose, we're going way back. It was called Millie's Tavern. Now, I don't know who Millie was. I don't know if she owned it. I don't know if it was the husband was married to Millie and he called it after her, or he called it after one of his kids. I have no information on this besides that it was called Millie's Tavern. So that was back in the 50s and 60s. So there you have it. That is the Blue Comet, the history of that place. So a few more here. Of course, we got to get to the legendary Glenside Pub, owned by the Kyle family, obviously, for years. If you know Glenside, you've been in the Glenside Pub many times. My band's played here many times. Great spot, great beer selection. Just your great town tavern, like the Glenside Pub. Such an awesome place. But it wasn't always the Glenside Pub, but it was always a pub, at least for the last 2 incarnations. So let's take a look. Before it was called the Glenside Friendly Tavern or Glenside Friendly Pub, one of the two. But before it was the Glenside Pub, it was called the Glenside Friendly. Now, the guy that owned this changed the name of it at some point to the Glenside Pub before selling it to the current owners, okay? But it was called the Glenside Friendly Tavern. There you have it. So if you went there in the 60s, that's the name you would have saw. Again, a recreated logo. And before that, I have one person that told me this, so I'm going to go with it. It was called Johnson's Bar. Johnson's Bar. So in the 50s, if you went to the Glenside Pub, the name of it would have been Johnson's Bar. Don't know anything about it besides the name. But if anybody knows, please leave it in the comments. Let me know. That'd be great. All right. Let's keep moving. A couple standalone places. This is the old Switchville Inn. The Switchville Inn was located behind the current LA Fitness on a very residential side street, out of the way, not any foot traffic. But it had great food from what I remember, and it had a bar, and it had great bartenders and things like that. So it was just a little tiny off-the-beaten-path place that probably closed down like 25 years ago, right around when I was like 21, 23, something like that. I don't know. But anyway, it was a cool spot. And now today, it's just like a regular house. You wouldn't even know it. It doesn't. This is from 15 years ago off Google Maps. And this is what it looked like 15 years ago. You could tell that the Switchville Inn was still there, but it just was closed down. And it sat like that for many years, closed down. All right, the Copper Door was another bar in Glenside. They had 4 locations: Abington, Glenside, Warrington, and Warminster. And the one in Glenside was over near the Knights of Columbus on Limecombe Pike. It was where the Tail of the Whale was, which was a seafood restaurant. Before that, it was the Copper Door. And that's, I found this on eBay, the Copper Door. It's for sale. It's a matchbook of the Glenside place, the Copper Door. Now, I heard that it closed down 50 or 60 years ago because there was a shooting in it. So there you go. Even 50, 60 years ago, they had shootings in places in Glenside. So there you have it. All right. Now, as promised, I'm going to save the cool thing for last. Let's flip over. Now we're on Mount Carmel Avenue, right in the heart of Glenside, right off of Eastern Road, right up the road from the tattoo parlor, and there's a cigar shop there. And we're down the road from the Cork. Okay, so we're on Mount Carmel. This is the front of the building. This is what it looks like in the front. Okay, right now it's a doctor's office here. I don't know what's over here. But if you go to the back of the building, so you have to go to Glenside Avenue, and you have to go down to Trevi where the old Rizzo's was, and you just keep walking down the street there. And on the left, you're going to come to some offices, doctor's offices and stuff. And I'm going to show you something here. If you look through the gap, you can see up here it says the Glenside Recreation, and it says 8 bowling. There was 8 bowling lanes in there. 8 bowling lanes. So that was actually the Glenside bowling parlor. They had a pinball room. They had 8 bowling lanes. They had this thing where they dropped a red pin, and if you hit the red pin, you would get it like a free game of bowling if it was on the top position. So it was a cool old spot. Apparently St. Luke's had a bowling team, and apparently like Abington High had a bowling team. There was also a bowling league in there. So the next time you walk down that Glenside, just pull in that driveway and take a look at that. It's still there to this day. You can still see those words, bowling center. And I'm going to leave you with this for the very last thing on my Glenside historical pub crawl, and other cool things in Glenside like this bowling center. I'm going to show you an inside picture of what that bowling alley looks like recently. And it's totally gutted. And don't ask me, I got this somewhere online, but I thought it was pretty cool. This is what it looks like. It's just totally gutted, like dusty old, and it's screaming to be revived. So I hope somebody in Glenside sees this, that has an interest and a little bit of cash in their pocket and wants to bring back that beautiful 8-lane bowling center, turn it into a bowling bar like they have downtown. I think it'd be great. But I think there's definitely opportunity to put another bowling center here back in place here in the 2020s. So anyway, that's Billy D. I hope you really enjoyed this. I spent some time researching this. Again, this is my hometown, so I really, really wanted to get this right. So I am Billy D. Thanks for tuning into the Publicans. Check out my YouTube page and check out my Facebook page. Come and like and subscribe to my Facebook page. And I will see you next time on the next pub tour. Thanks.